Someone dropped off a bucket of trash, so I guess we should work on it. Jumping right in, the first thing everyone wants to know is, will it run? So we're going to start by cleaning the fuel system. Taking off the engine cover, the first thing you may notice is that everything looks immaculate. For context, this boat is a 1979 Ranger 1600 with a 1978 Mariner 60 horsepower parallel twin two-stroke outboard. I believe the 1600 stands for 16 feet, but I have not verified that yet. As a motorcycle guy, I'm used to engines being rated in terms of cubic centimeters. Out of curiosity, I tried to find the displacement of this engine, however it doesn't physically say it anywhere, nor have I found anywhere online. One source suggested it was about 750 cc, but that doesn't exactly sound correct to me based on the physical size of the engine. 1987 was the last time this boat was registered, meaning that there's a good chance it was used for less than a decade, which would make sense. It should be noted that I have never worked on a boat of any kind before, that I also did no research before jumping into working on it. That being said, I initially assumed the main engine was a four-stroke, which surprised me later on. I was surprised to find the carburetors on this engine were structured more like lawnmower carburetors than, say, a motorcycle carburetor. Which then made me realize that the throttle cables are actually attached to what looks like a governor system on the engine rather than the throttle linkage. This makes sense because boat engines usually run continuously at a steady RPM and load, like a lawnmower. Also interesting is the choke mechanism, which uses a small induction coil to actuate the choke on the carburetor with the press of a button, meaning my fat ass doesn't have to leave the driver's seat to choke the engine on cold days. Taking the carbs off was straightforward. Couple linkages here, a few fuel hoses there, and some 10mm nuts connecting it to the engine. Some of the access was a little tight, but that could probably be remedied by taking the engine off the boat entirely. After getting the carbs off, I looked in the engine and finally realized it was a two-stroke. Listen to how surprised that schmuck is about that.
Reed valves? Why do you boat? Is this a two-stroke?
Getting the carbs onto the bench, we do all of the normal carb clean things. Bowls off, jets out, air screw unscrewed, so on and so forth. After that, we blow generous amounts of carb clean through every orifice, making sure it comes out of somewhere else. Just like the human body, it's concerning if stuff goes in, but then proceeds to never come back out. These carbs were fairly clean to begin with. All I found was some brown sludge in the bowls, no green ethanol crust like we'd expect today, further suggesting that this engine hasn't been run in decades. As far as carbs go, these key-ins were very simple. Only one main jet for fuel, 2 air metering jets on the intake side, and the idle mixture being handled by the air screw. If you were to put this carb on a motorcycle, or any other engine that needs to operate in a wide RPM and load range, it would be a mess. However, the throttle on this engine is controlled by a governor, and loads at low RPM are low due to the nature of water. This combination means that the throttle input is always smooth and slow, while load is always consistent and predictable, making these carbs just fine for this application. As the old service manual saying goes, reassembly is the reverse process of disassembly. So, other than replacing all of the old fuel lines, there's not much to say. In the meantime, we can talk about the history of Mariner engines. And the first thing you need to know about Mariner is that it was owned by Mercury Marine Products, but produced by Yamaha. And the first thing you need to know about Yamaha outboards at the time is that they were produced by Sanshin Industries. Pardon my pronunciation. During the late 50s and 60s, Yamaha was using some of their motorcycle engine designs and converting them to work in an outboard format. They would in turn have Sanshin Industries produce these designs. At this time, the team known as Yamaha 3rd Engineering Division was very small, about 12 people. Because of this, early designs were riddled with reliability issues, both from the engines not being designed for long durations of wide-open throttle and from very harsh operating conditions. As time grew on, Yamaha invested more into their research and development for outboards, as well as the production of them. Sanshin Industries eventually became a Yamaha subsidiary. Reliability and performance began to improve after this. It was in 1972 that the American outboard manufacturer Mercury came to Yamaha looking to make a deal. They wanted to make Sanshin Industries a joint venture, meaning it would be owned in equal parts by Mercury and Yamaha. In return, Mercury would sell Yamaha outboard engines in the USA and Australia under the new Mariner brand name. Other world markets would be unaffected, but as per the agreement, Yamaha would be barred from selling Yamaha brand engines in the USA and Australia for a period of 10 years. Yamaha was not a big fan of this deal. It's sort of like your weird older cousin taking half of the dinner you just made and giving it to his friends, claiming he made it. However, Yamaha knew that if they didn't take the deal, then Mercury could just as easily go to the likes of Suzuki instead. This, combined with Yamaha's craving for Mercury's technical knowledge at the time, drove them to accept. It is during this time period in the 70s where the engine in this video was built. Through and through, it's a Yamaha engine, but to the rest of the world, this engine would have been the Yamaha 60AE. Every other Mariner engine at the time could also be traced back to a Yamaha counterpart. Where the story takes a turn is in 1978. The FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, took issue with the nature of Mercury's deal. The FTC argued that by essentially keeping Yamaha out of the US market, Mercury was hurting consumers by limiting their freedom of choice. Such actions were seen as monopolistic, sort of like Standard Oil buying every other competing oil company to suppress competition. After 4 years of deliberation by the US government, it was decided that Mercury's deal would be broken up. Subsequently, Mercury was forced to sell all of their shares in Sanshin Industries, making the company a Yamaha subsidiary once again. After 1983, new Mariner engines effectively became Mercury engines, with only some specific parts and pieces being manufactured by Yamaha and shipped over for assembly. During this time, the parts sourced from Yamaha didn't have anything in common with other Yamaha outboards of the day, essentially making Mercury and Yamaha's relationship purely contractual from that point on. Yamaha then entered the US market on their own. Later, in 1999, Mercury realized they could save more in production costs than they could make in brand synergy by dissolving the Mariner brand, and thus Mariner was no more. I bet you didn't think outboard engine history could actually be interesting, did you? In fact, if you're anything like me, you've probably never given outboard engines a second thought until now, when in fact they can be super cool. For example, Yamaha later went on to build a much larger 225 horsepower outboard engine that utilizes a 2.6-liter two-stroke V6. Forget the crazy appeal of the two-stroke triples from days past, like the Kawasaki Z1. Somebody needs to put one of these beasts in a motorcycle. If you're at all interested in taking a deeper dive into Yamaha's outboard past, I will link my source in the description. It's a recount of Sanshin's history by their previous CEO, Shikara Yasukawa. Anyway, now that we have the carbs back on the engine, we can do other important things like check the prop shaft oil. From what I could tell, it was brand new and at the correct level. Next, I grabbed a battery from one of my motorcycles and bolted it in. Searching for a gas tank to use, I came across the original. In some of my research, I also managed to find the exact looking gas can but branded by Tohatsu, which is kind of interesting. The gas can comes with a built-in mechanical fuel gauge. There is also a priming bulb on the hose to get the gas flowing. None of this was going to be any good to me, though, because the rubber was hard, the gas was old, and the tank was rusty. What was interesting to me was the quick disconnect fittings. which were these little check valves that made sure no gas would spill out upon connecting or disconnecting the hose to either the tank or the engine. I took off these specific fittings as I would need them to connect the engine to a different, less decrepit gas can. The gas for this engine is a 50-to-1 two-stroke mixture. Now we get to the part that everyone's been waiting for. First, I tried to find the key for the ignition, but it was nowhere to be found. Then, I looked into hot wiring it, but found that there were 9 wires coming out of the key switch. Not wanting to hunt down a wiring diagram, I chose option 3, smash it with a screwdriver. Now, smash is a generous term for this ignition switch. Since it was primarily made of plastic, all it really took was some gentle prying and prodding to get it to turn freely. Now that we've upgraded to keyless ignition, we can hear the engine turn over for the first time. The next challenge to overcome is getting gas into the carburetors. It would have to make its way from the tank, through the external hose, through the leaky connection on the engine, through the fuel filter, through the pump, and finally to the carbs. This is where that aforementioned fuel priming bulb would have come in handy. In light of that, I decided to try and siphon the gas to at least the fuel filter, and then hold the gas can above the engine to give it as much of a chance of working as possible. Now, if you know anything about outboards, you know you need these earmuff-looking things to properly run them on land. This is so that you don't end up overheating the engine or running the water pump dry. They hook up to your garden hose and they feed the engine nice cool water as if it were on the lake. However, I do not currently own a pair, so we're just going to see if it fires up for a second and then turn it right back off again. And there it goes, in a glorious cloud of two-stroke smoke. I would like to thank my loyal supporters for cheering me on to this achievement. I wouldn't blame you for clicking off the video now if that's all you came to see, but if you're interested in what comes with a 45-year-old free boat, then stick around. First, we consider a question. Where do you put the air filter for an outboard engine? Is it A, found in an airbox connected to the intake manifold? B, directly in the intake manifold? Or C, in the intake for the outer housing of the engine? It's a trick question. There is no air filter on an outboard. Apparently, there isn't much dust to be filtered when you're out on the water. This being said, I had no idea this was the case when I started this project, and it confused me for some time. Here I'm opening up and cleaning the engine housing, trying to find that non-existent filter. As for the rest of the boat, the only thing you may not have seen on the exterior is the dry rotted trailer tires. As for the interior, I will let Live Kyle tell you about that.
Let's play a little game of what's in the boat. Starting in the back here, we of course have our engine, our miscellaneous wiring, which looks some hacked in, and I think those battery leads are actually factory. We've got our semi-disassembled and in disarray bilge pump setup. Who knows if those work? We have a brand new seat in a box, 2 of them actually, so that should be pretty nice. Moving forward, we have a smaller 5 horsepower trolling motor, also 2-stroke. Kind of interesting, it's got the same gas hookup as the main one. I think they assume that you just hot swap interchange them, which is interesting. Got a bucket here, some bulbs, is that a tech? No, depth sounder. Okay, interesting. All of this PVC is actually for a tarp setup, which I will put back in place. Got some miscellaneous hardware and a pot, some more in the bags. I think there's a plug in there. Some rope. Other miscellaneous boat things. Like a parts tray. Here's the dash and the throttle. Didn't come with a key, but with some light screwdrivering, that ignition came apart. This guy, it isn't connected at all, which is concerning. Moving forward, we have a small electric trolling motor as well that I think mounts to the front of the boat. The tarp for the cover, the original gas can, which is pretty cool, some other auxiliary gas cans. I believe that is like a come along or something to pull it onto the trailer, maybe. Some more rope. There's like a quilted blanket type deal in the front that is completely frozen solid, as well as some outlets, which must have an inverter somewhere because they're 120, which is interesting. So that's about it for the inside of the boat.
As for the future of the boat, there are quite a few things I need to order before I can continue work. There's things like water muffs that were mentioned earlier. Once I get this stuff ordered, you can expect a part 2. The ultimate goal, of course, is to get this thing on the water. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed, then do all the things other YouTubers ask you to do. I know you know what they are.